Now that all of the Battlefield 2042 maps have been released, and we've all had a decent amount of time to play them, I thought now would be a good time to provide a review and rank them against each other, as well as providing some insight into how I think you should play these maps if you want to win more consistently, if you care about that. Some quick tidbits before we start. I'm going to be reviewing the Conquest layouts for both 64 and 128 gameplay modes, indicated here. This is just because these are the main modes that I enjoy in play. I'm ranking these against the other Battlefield 2042 maps rather than Battlefield maps in general. Overall, I do think the maps in 2042 are quite a bit weaker than ones offered in previous iterations of the franchise. And finally, these are just my opinions. I know for a fact that not everyone is going to agree with me. For example, I don't think my friend Cabal and I agree on a single map, so I absolutely expect him to berate me in the comments. Hopefully, I'll provide a good explanation to why I think a map is ranked where it is. I've provided a tier list in the description. I encourage you to make your own and share your list and overview in the comments below. Before I continue, I just want to ask that if you enjoy the content, please subscribe. What's that? You aren't sure how to subscribe? Well, let me show you. Imagine this SRAW missile is your mouse cursor, and this Nightbird way in the distance is the subscribe button. You just need to line it up, and click! Here's how I rate these tier positions. Okay, let's go. Arica Harbour. This map is a classic from Bad Company 2, and as such it's definitely one of the more stronger maps on offer. The map is filled with lots of good cover and decent destruction, which helps you feel like it isn't just a running sim. Given its shape, it plays well, usually with a pretty well defined flow. One thing that I don't like is this triple flag sector B in the middle. While it's pretty fun to fight over, you'll almost never see it completely captured. This makes fighting over these flags much less significant than just flanking around to capture A1 or C1. Had B been split into maybe two separate single flag sectors, one encompassing the bridges to the north and one the buildings and desert to the south, I think this map would have played much better. In order to win on this map, as I mentioned already, it's much more efficient for you to focus on A1 and C1. If you focus on the sector closest to your enemy's main base and let your team worry about making sure B isn't completely capped, you will put your team in a very good position. I would rate this A tier. Breakaway 128 is an absolute mess in my opinion. The map is completely unbalanced in favour of the US side due to the massive height advantage which the glacier offers. You have to remember that in 2042 an advantage in height means a significant travel speed advantage, because free falling and parachuting is so much quicker than running, and vehicles in this game travel so much slower climbing up. Sector E is almost permanently US controlled, given how difficult it is for the Russian side to make their way there. For the Russian team, this isn't just time consuming to travel, it's also very risky, since the path up to E is tight and you're an easy target for snipers. How do you expect this old biddy to climb that hill in a reasonable amount of time? I think I can count on two hands the amount of times that I've fought over E2. A, on the other hand, is constantly being fought over, not only because it's easy to get to for both teams, but it's actually a fun objective to fight over, with plenty of cover and a variety of different range options to fight within. C objective is a good respite for players who want to mainly focus on infantry close range fights, and due to its multiple levels of elevation and hidden nooks, make it an objective that is great to fight over but typically hard to fully capture. D and B both being single flag sectors means that this is where you should be putting your time as an individual if you want to have a significant effect on the game. D1 especially is very easy for the US team to keep assaulting because of the aforementioned glacial advantage. Alternatively, if you're on the Russian team and you want to try and reduce the massive advantage which the US team has, get yourself in a squad embedded into E2. It's actually a pretty fun objective to fight over, but damn does it suck getting there without the transport chopper. This map is frustrating because the individual elements are mostly good, but that glacier just completely ruins it. DICE in this game had a massive obsession with massive structures, without considering the effect that this would have on gameplay. Style over substance. If they'd cut down the height of the glacier by maybe like 3/4, the map would have been much better. I give this map a D. Thankfully, the 64 player variant of this map is much better in my opinion. Not only does it drop the frustrating multi-flag sectors, but the map completely cuts out the glacier. The fighting on the objectives is fun and varied and offers plenty of different options for players. If I had to complain about anything, it would be that D and E don't get as many ground vehicles assaulting them compared to A and B, due to the difficulty of getting them onto the oil rig. But a counterbalance to that is that Objective A is pretty much immune to aircraft assault. How do you win in this map? Well, it's pretty balanced in my opinion. Generally the better team will win. Something that works for me is to capture C and then to try to use a vehicle to keep these paths clear from infantry and to cut off vehicles trying to flank around to backcap, hoping that your team can keep control over the flags closer to their respective main base. Personally, I think Breakaway demonstrates what DICE could have done with these massive maps in addition to reworking them. They could have split their workable spaces into multiple maps. In this case, one area with the warehouses, hangars and silos. This is a massive area with lots of good fighting and potential flag locations. And one other map on top of the glacier using the assets which are already up there. Of course, this is something that they eventually did with Hourglass and Stadium, but they did do a terrible job of advertising this in a way that just managed to piss off the community. Whatever, we'll get to those maps soon. Right, for Breakaway 64, I give it an A. A very good map in my opinion. Caspian Border is a Battlefield 3 classic. The map plays well with a variety of different playstyles and fighting ranges offered. While I personally prefer the Battlefield 4 Caspian Border with its massive destroyed wall instead of metal fence, this is still a good map. I feel like for whatever reason, all caps are pretty common on this map. I'm not sure if it's the faster travel speed of infantry or what, but I don't think it plays as well in 2042 as it did in Battlefield 3. I like that they put in the AT Cornet launchers. It means that non-engineers actually have an option if an enemy tank is sitting capturing a friendly objective. Absolutely be sure to use these if you get the chance. They do very good damage and are massively underrated. One thing I don't really care for is the A1 objective. The reason being is that most of the infantry fighting happens over C and D, with it naturally spilling out to E and B, since there's decent cover from the central objectives to E and B. However, A is quite a bit of a trek, and the cover is very sparse. A feels very vehicle focused, but it's so much closer to the US main base that it means it normally just stays US for most of the game. I think you generally win if you control the middle two objectives. Odds are that one of the outer objectives will be held by your team, and if you have a vehicle, make sure you're rolling out to A1 to make sure it stays yours. Overall, I think the map is fine. It's not my favourite, but it's definitely not the worst. I'm sure I'll get some flack for even suggesting that a Battlefield 3 map is worse than a 2042 one, but when it comes down to it, this map doesn't play as great as others in 2042. I have to put this in B tier. It is close to A tier, but it just misses the mark for me. Discarded 128 is a map where I like the individual elements, but getting between these objectives without a vehicle is a slog because of the large, mostly empty space. The flooded town at B and the discarded ship at D are both a blast to play as infantry, both with a unique feel, but because they're dual flags, I find that you can spend a lot of time there without getting much done for your team, passing the two flags back and forth with the enemy team. In D especially, it's difficult to get everyone out since there are so many nooks and crannies on that ship. The scrapyard at A and the ship parts at E are both very good objectives too. With a good balance of infantry and vehicle options for capturing, this usually means that they're frequent targets of backcapping by good vehicle players. At the centre point of the map is C, which is fine. I like the main level, but the verticality of the left and right sections of the ships means that it can be difficult to flush out campers, since you have to risk climbing the stairs in order to deal with them. I believe you can also capture this objective with vehicles, but if you have infantry in the main section, you have no way of dealing with them, and hence won't be able to capture it. Being a good vehicle player who focuses on objectives is the best way to win on this map. Keep moving around between all points other than D, which you can ignore since you can't make any impact on. A and E should be priorities, with B being next. Make sure you keep enemy ground armor cold, and you should be golden. I feel like they were so close with this rework, but the map is just a little too big. I would give this a high B. Discarded 64 retains many of the flag elements of the 128 variant, with only Objective A being a new location. While I have a good time with this map, it's definitely not perfect. I can't for the life of me understand why they kept the discarded ship at sea as a dual flag. As it stands, it's definitely the objective which you should ignore if you want to win on this map. Focus on the single flag sectors A, B and D, rolling between them in a vehicle if you're into that, or if you want you can just focus infantry and camp out around the flag nearest to your enemy's main base. A is a really good place to fight over, which I think a lot of players miss out upon as they naturally get pulled into the centre objectives, but unfortunately A is just too far away from the rest of the map. I'll give this a B. I'll be honest, to me, Exposure is a spectacle map with so many gaping flaws. It's so weird because I feel like the community loves this map, but I can just not stand it. It does have some decent elements, but the negatives massively outweigh the positives. We'll start with the 128 variant. First, let's discuss the big feature of this map, the massive cliffs. While these are quite a sight to see, they're another case of style over substance. Oh yeah, being on top of them is great. You can hop off and parachute to pretty much anywhere below. But once you get down into those valley objectives, crawling out of them is almost impossible. The run up from these objectives is a massive time sink, and because of how slowly vehicles travel up hills, don't expect them to save you too much time. Even going between the two E points is a slog if you don't have a vehicle, and due to the cliff, good luck capturing both E objectives, since as soon as you reach the other flag, you can almost guarantee that someone is parachuted down to the flag that you originally held from any of the interior objectives B, C and D, or from the cliffs above. On the topic of the interior objectives, these are actually where you should be putting your focus if you want to win in this map. Thanks to the zip lines over the valleys, getting between these objectives on foot doesn't take too long, and the close range fighting offered at these flags is actually a pretty good time. Capture the nearest one to your main base, then start pushing to sea and beyond. Enemies on the cliff will start dropping down to backcap you, so expect to be doing a lot of defending and moving between these three flags. The A objective is fine, clearly it was built with vehicles in mind as travelling between the two flags on foot is very open. The fighting on A2 is pretty decent with lots of cover for infantry to try and stop a vehicular assault. F on the other hand, oh my god, what were they thinking? Look at how far these objectives are away from everything else on the map. Similar to the Glacier on Breakaway, it's a massive pain to get to. Let's say you plan on going there from A. First you have to cross this pretty sizable plain. This location is great for some good tank battles, provided that you don't have an enemy Tor perched up on the hill west of the Russian top base. Once you finally get to either of the flags there, the points are very easy for infantry to hold, since you have these buildings which can't be assaulted without you disembarking and risking getting your vehicle stolen. F should have been moved much closer to the A objective or just completely removed. Finally, one thing that really bothers me about this map is how they clearly wanted to give infantry and vehicle players their own little space. Vehicle players, here's this massive open plain on top of the cliff that infantry aren't going to want to run across, so that you can fight other vehicles. Infantry players, here are these tight tunnels with some sweet CQC infantry fights that vehicles can't get you in. Valley players, here's some dirt so you can eat shit. But I think Battlefield is best when vehicle and infantry gameplay blends together. Segregation of the two isn't why I play Battlefield. Also, can we discuss how frigging beautiful the lake and mountains to the north are? This is what I want the focus of the map to be, not some dirty hole in the ground. Anyway, if someone who enjoys this map could please help me understand what is good about it, I await your comment. For me, this is a solid D. The 64 player version of the map is fine. These aren't the flags which I would have chosen for the map, but here we are. A is a fun objective where you'll find most of the vehicle and infantry combat. Unfortunately, I've found that due to the layout of the main bases, so many players just camp on their ridge, especially the Wildcats. Personally, I prefer to move my Wildcat to A. The play south of A lets me cover pretty much the entire map with anti-aircraft cover. B1 and B2 are very infantry focused and they're very difficult to full cap, but they'll still keep the attention of many players. This is for a few reasons. One, the spawns are very intertwined. Sometimes you'll choose to spawn on B2 and end up closer to B1. There are multiple routes between the two flags, and you'll find that infantry are constantly parachuting down from either their main bases or from A. I'll typically avoid this sector for this reason. C and D are those valley objectives that made up E in the 128 Conquest version, now each flag representing its own objective. This makes them more worthwhile to play, but you will still be finding that they're constantly being rained upon by enemy infantry hopping off the hills. If you play these points, you'll be dashing backwards and forwards between them all game. I usually play this map in one of two ways. The first is to take and protect A. It being the central location and high point in the map means that holding it gives your friendly infantry a good front to attack the flags below. Alternatively, I'll take a vehicle down into the low area and just bounce between C and D. You can use your team's elevator found in your main base if you're a bitch, or you can just throw your vehicle off a cliff like a badass. Because of how rare it is to see vehicles in the low level, you'll generally have no competition here. This makes vehicles like the Ram very strong here. This version of the map is a little better than the 128 version, but not by much. I'll give it a C. I think Flashpoint is a really good map. All of the objectives are varied and they can be assaulted by both vehicles and infantry, with some points preferring one over the other. It has a great variety of elevations which aren't just locked behind certain specialists and everyone can exploit to gain an advantage. The objectives are spaced out decently with good varied cover spread throughout, which means that moving between them isn't a terrible experience. The roads to the north and south of the map also mean that vehicles always have an avenue to get around and flank objectives, which makes full caps less frequent. This coupled with the general flag layout give this map one of the best flows in the game, with a lot of back and forth action between objectives. A, B, C, E, F and G are awesome objectives with a variety of cover and buildings to use for infantry, but can still be assaulted by ground armour. Each is unique in its own way to keep the fighting interesting. Of note are these tunnels that go between E and C, for being another good option that allows people an alternative path to attack, and the hills between B, C and E and F for giving some options for fighting between varied elevations. Objective D lies in a tunnel under the entire centre of the map, and it's okay. It's a pretty linear objective with the unfortunate consequence of having really bad spawn points. Having players spawn in the middle of the tunnel right in sight of the enemies capturing the objective. It has 4 entryways, an elevator to the south, a large hole in the middle, 2 zipline shafts outside of E, and a tunnel entrance to the north. Vehicles can assault here, but it's fairly uncommon considering the tight corridor which you have to work with. I think the map would have been fine without this objective, but as it is, it's fine. The team that made this map did a really fantastic job in my opinion, and to me it stands out as a map that plays really well every time. Typically, if you want to win on this map, I would recommend going for the objectives outside of the centre, as they're often neglected by players focusing on C, D and E. Getting my squad buried into objectives A and B or F and G has led to a fantastic set of games. I'm happy to give this map the first S, and I'd also be happy to see this map return for future games. It was so close to greatness with Haven, but with some minor design decisions, DICE really dropped the ball. Most of the objectives are fine. The petrol station at A and the generators at D are fun objectives which allow for some good fighting. The checkpoint made up of destroyed buses at E is a pretty unique looking objective. I do wish that it had a larger capture radius, as it doesn't extend completely across the street even though it feels like it should. The downed condo at B can be a bit frustrating because of the houses overlooking the condo towards C, and the objective spawn locations are so predictable and out in the open that they're rife for camping abuse. The problem objective is the market at Flag C. It being the central objective makes it the most important one in the map, as having access to it gives your team spawn points that allow for a strong foothold into the outer objectives. However, the objective itself is completely exposed from all sides. The capture radius is surrounded on both sides by high ground and buildings. Couple this with very little high cover and you'll quickly learn that attacking this objective is completely miserable. If your team doesn't capture this objective first, then you can pretty much guarantee that your team is going to have a very rough fight ahead. Ground vehicles would have been useful in helping you capture this objective, but this map only has access to one heavy armoured vehicle, so if your teammate who rushed the tank doesn't want to focus on this objective, then you're completely out of luck. If you've played on this map a lot, you'll find that full caps are especially common and very frustrating, driven by the fact that a lot of the objectives are very defensible, containing plenty of buildings and high ground to hold up and shoot attackers, and also that there are no transport vehicles which could potentially allow people to ride out and try to break through by capping one of the rear objectives. The lack of these vehicles is a massive oversight on DICE's part here. I'm not talking about missing transport choppers, CAVs, MAVs, or even LATVs, but civilian transports, trucks, ATVs and the like. If you want to see a very good explanation of this map's issues, I would strongly recommend Gravity's analysis of it, which I thought hit the nail on the head, breaking down this issue, when others were falsely crying that the map was completely one-sided in the favour of the Russians without any explanation. To win, capture and hold C. If you can have a balanced game on this map, it can be a very good time, but it very often becomes a one-sided mess. DICE fumbled here and I'm very sorry to see that. I have to give it a high C. Hourglass. What a terrible map. Even a rework couldn't save this mess. You can just look at this map layout and know it isn't going to be a good time. The way I see it, there are three main aspects of the map. The city outskirts containing A flag, the highway objectives consisting of B, C and D, and the city made up of E, F and G. A is completely out of the way of everything else on the map, so often that it goes completely unchallenged, being a US flag the entire game, other than when Russian armor has nothing else to do. B objective is fine, but it can be a bit annoying to locate hidden defenders when attacking this objective, since you have to scour the top and the bottom sections. The bottom section is incredibly dark. I'm not sure if it's just my settings, but I've been killed loads of times because of the low visibility in this area. The bottom section has a tunnel path to sea, which I think I've used like once or twice. I remember DICE mentioned that this was a big feature of the rework, which is a little embarrassing to say the least. The crater at sea is a very open objective, with probably the worst spawn locations in the entire game. People capturing the objective within the crater will frequently see players spawning on the north rim completely out in the open. The highway segment at D is fine with plenty of cover around the area, but since it lies right at the opening to the city, you'll frequently find snipers raining down fire onto it or javelin engineers relentlessly pounding armor here. The area south of C and D is completely barren and a massive pain to travel over if you ever find yourself there without a vehicle. I'm not really sure why they left all of this space empty. The city objectives E, F and G are probably my favourite objectives of the map to fight over, but they're very sparse when it comes to cover between the objectives. I think giving infantry access to the massive towers was a massive misstep on DICE's part, as it usually leads to a lot of rooftop camping. The Russian and US main base spawns here practically touch E and G respectively, so holding these objectives as the opposing team is usually quite a pain. Overall, this was easily the laziest rework, and the community definitely recognised that once it was released. Unfortunately, it definitely needed the most changing, clearly being the community's least favourite map when the game was released, and DICE just wasn't able to put the work in to change the sentiment. F. Also, why doesn't it get a 64 player variant? It could have just been the town part with a few more flags scattered throughout and it might have been pretty decent. Kaleidoscope 128 is a mess. My main issues with the maps are objectives A, C and E. A and E both share similar issues, both being dual flag objectives hosted around skyscrapers. The problem with this is that their horrendous spawns mean that they're almost impossible to full cap. Spawning on A2 leads to you spawning closer to A1, and when you try to spawn on one of the E flags that's being captured, you seem to spawn closer to the other E flag. This means you have this horrible back and forth bullshit where you capture the bottom objective, then you travel up the elevators to fight for the top one. In the meantime, players who are spawning on the top objective to help defend spawn at the bottom and start the cycle that you just had. It's an absolute joke. I thought we were done with rooftop objectives. I thought that we'd learned our lesson half a year after release that this wasn't a good idea. Yes, the rooftop at E2 is pretty and has a reminiscent feel of the rooftop of the skyscraper in Siege of Shanghai in Battlefield 4, but you could at least knock that skyscraper down instead of dealing with its crap. I really hate these objectives. C is yet another case of style over substance. While the objective is pretty fun to fight over in the surrounding area and capture zone, there are plenty of areas in this building which I swear just exist to make it easier for camping enemies to hide out in, until the coast is clear. Then they can just worm their way back into the objective. Has anyone ever actually fought on the top floor, or is it just a place for spawn beacons? And what is the reason that they left these areas accessible? You shouldn't need to play as McKay in order to clear an objective of campers. Objective B, which seems to be some sort of thrown together outpost, is probably my favourite objective on the map, and I think overall the community agrees with me, judging by the fact that I see so many people come to fight here. The area offers plenty of different range fighting opportunities depending on where you want to start your engagements, with plenty of small hills and bushes to use for cover. The plaza at D is fine, but it can be frustrating if you're using a vehicle to try and capture them, since infantry can hide in both of the structures here and be perfectly safe from you. The dome at D2 especially has plenty of crannies which players love to camp in, making assaulting this structure very unpleasant. It also has the unfortunate location of being constantly rained upon by infantry who spawned on the skyscraper across from E2. All of this is not to mention that getting between the far left and far right objectives is very slow and boring. The best you can do is grab yourself a tuk-tuk which is spread sparsely throughout the map. An unpleasant experience. I'll give it a high F, accounting to the very few areas which are fun to fight over. Oh, how do you win this map? I have no idea. The outcome seems completely undetermined by anything. I usually just play around B like everyone else. I suppose you could exploit those locations in C, throw a spawn beacon there and just constantly keep harassing that objective. That might work. I don't know. Fortunately, the 64 player version of the map is much smaller. Unfortunately, it still has 2 skyscrapers at C objective, and even more unfortunately, they now give one team a bit of an advantage. The US team being able to capture these objectives first means that they can use the elevators and have a more efficient way to transport infantry over the map. Thankfully, I don't believe these flags spawn at the top of the towers. Ha, just kidding, of course they do. Hold C2 and you'll spawn on top of the skyscraper at C1. Thanks for that, dice, that totally makes sense. The plaza at A and the data center at B are the same as the 128 variant. I will say with the smaller layout, there is more fighting happening in the center area of this map, which provides a lot of interesting cover and makes it so that traveling between these 3 sectors is a pretty decent time. C2 is the same as E1, so the only new flag here is inside the tower at C1, which is a pretty good flag. It's got a little bit of elevation and a decent amount of cover. The team that generally wins this map is the team that can hold B for the longest, simply because it's the single flag sector and capturing it and holding it is easier than fighting over sectors A or C. Overall, an improvement over the 128 version, pretty good but not great. C. Manifest 128 is frustrating because I really do enjoy its individual sectors, but it has plenty of other problems. The flags at the warehouse and crates at A provide plenty of routes between the two, with a good combination of medium and close range fighting offered. It has a couple of roads throughout so vehicles can also participate in the fight. The crate loading area at A is similar to A, plenty of routes between the 2 flags, roads, etc. I will say that these objectives massively favour McKay and his grappling hook. Being able to seize the high ground that no other specialist can easily get to gives you such a huge advantage in this map that it's not even funny. A and E are the worst for this, and a decent McKay player can make your life a nightmare, and if he has a squad with a recon player using a spawn beacon, you have absolutely no chance of closing out these sectors for your team. The radar station on the hill at B is one of the most unique layouts of any map, and it's pretty good. The radar dome at B1 unfortunately has predictable spawn points over the hill at the north, which can make it a little frustrating if you're trying to spawn on it to help defend, but overall the cover and fighting off it is pretty good. B2 is a large multi-level building which offers some good CQC fighting, whether it's throughout the stairways or the large rooms in the middle. I do wish that the building had more destruction so that it wasn't so camper friendly. Some of the outside walls are destructible, but none of the interior walls seem to be. While this is all fine and dandy, if you want to be winning this map, then the ships C and D are where you should be spending your time. These being single flag sectors, they're the easiest to capture and get between if you're playing infantry. This is all thanks to the zipline connecting the two, or the ability to hop off the ship you're on and parachute over to the next one. Both objectives are very similar to one another. In fact, unless you've played this game extensively, from just a screenshot, the two objectives are pretty impossible to tell apart. It kind of borders on laziness. The fighting offered is mostly close combat and fast paced, which is certainly enjoyable. One irritating thing about these boats is the cranes which hang overhead. These are constantly filled with snipers and campers who will be dropping down to capture these objectives. There are 4 of them and they're a massive pain to clear. Honestly, most of the time I just ignore them and hope that friendly aircraft will clear them for me. I definitely think that they shouldn't have had 2 ship objectives. One would have been enough, and maybe 1 crane would have also sufficed. Overall, I like what is offered on Manifest, but as a whole package it just doesn't feel good. Travelling between these objectives isn't very pleasant, so it's very easy to find yourself just hanging out in one sector the entire game. I'm going to give it a C. Manifest 64 is a much improved map in my opinion. The flags at Sector A have a good variety of close-range infantry gameplay on offer within the capture radius and more long-range opportunities moving between the flags, with plenty of paths on offer. The sector does encompass the cranes which I mentioned earlier, which are almost as much of a pain as they are in the 128 variant, less so here because they don't hang directly over both objectives, only over A2. The objective at the radar station B now lies outside of the multi-storey building, so attacking and defending is much more transparent, as you don't need to go hunting on every floor for that one enemy camping the objective. The capture radius also encompasses the road, so that ground vehicles can aid in capturing this objective. In addition, there's only 1 flag on the hill instead of 2. This means that this objective is what you want to be focusing on if you want to be winning, since it is much easier to capture and milk for tickets. The crates at C are the same as the capture points on A in the 128 variant, so the same mechanic issues are present here. I do enjoy this map despite its flaws. I'm going to give it a high B, but the issues I have with the 2 multi-flag sectors can ruin games from time to time and sour the experience. Noshahr Canals returns from Battlefield 3, and while the map is very good, I think the Battlefield 2042 version has a similar issue to Caspian Border, that being that all caps are very common. I've had multiple games on this map last less than 5 minutes because one team has been unable to hold any objective, and the ticket counter is drained almost immediately. Unlike Caspian Border, I do think that every objective gets a decent amount of attention from the players. There isn't one objective that typically gets ignored. The fighting on offer on all the objectives is exactly what I want in Battlefield. A good mix of objectives which facilitate a combination of vehicle and infantry gameplay. Some objectives like A and D prefer infantry, and others like B, C and E prefer vehicles, but you can capture all objectives and more importantly have a good time with either. One thing about this map I love is the sheer variety of locations you can fight over. Every sector and even the locations between sectors offer something interesting. One minute you're fighting over a train line between carts, the next you're travelling through a warehouse, and after that you're fighting under an overpass. You get the point. One minor gripe I have with this map is how the US vehicle spawn is quite a bit closer to the sectors than the Russian spawn. Now that I think about it, this might be what causes the all caps to be so common. I don't have any real suggestions on how to win this map. Flag and sector wise it's pretty well balanced as far as I can tell. Holding C is probably your best bet since having it can give your infantry a foothold to attack the outer objectives. I wish I knew why all caps were so common, but as it stands it really doesn't matter. This map is great and I'm going to give it an S. Orbital 128 is made up of a bunch of good and bad sectors with disappointing travel locations between them. The tower at Sector A is one of those 2 tall objectives, similar to the towers on Kaleidoscope. Considering that it has multiple points which it can be assaulted from, it is more enjoyable compared to the Kaleidoscope skyscrapers with their elevated dependents. Zip ropes and stairways on the side give you quite a few options, which is very appreciated. The point itself is enjoyable to fight over with plenty of small cover, and it even has a few different high ground options. My issue with this objective is that it gives you a lot of control over the warehouses at Sector B. If you control A, you should have a consistent stream of infantry floating down to both B flags below. This makes this objective one of the most valuable sectors, and it is what I would focus on holding if you want to win on this map. Sector B is made up of two very good points, despite the looming dependence on A. Both capture points are big enough for both infantry and vehicles, and have two good paths between them, one being an underground path, which is safe from vehicles but has the risk of being easily blocked by enemy infantry. The second is the above ground path, which is littered with craters, destroyed vehicles, and a small outpost. This route opens you up to more risk from vehicles and snipers, but it's obviously more open, so you're free to choose what path works for you at that time. I also enjoy that the warehouse walls are destructible, which stops these objectives becoming stale. My one issue with this sector is the spawn points on B1 put you in the open field to the north, which can leave you completely screwed since infantry capturing at B1 will have a clear sightline to you. The rocket at Sector C is the only almost levolution which 2042 offers, which is a little disappointing. If the rocket takes damage while it's taking off, it will explode and leave debris all over the sector. This debris actually does affect the game in a small way, as it limits how well vehicles can travel around, and more importantly, capture this point. The sector itself is fine. The rocket tower behind the objective is frequently held by snipers, so if they're enemy snipers, expect infantry to be constantly dropping down onto C, so you'll have to clear that out before you head out, which can be a pain. The tower itself isn't very fun or interesting to attack. There's a stairway up, but you can cut a bunch of that out by using one of the two elevators offered at the base of the tower. Overall, this is a pretty unpleasant objective. I hate the bunker at Objective D. It's everything I hate about forced choke points. It's filled with campers and it's a complete meat grinder. The bunker has three entrances, one at the front, one at the side, and a pair of zip lines that come up from the tunnel, which passes through the hill. The zip lines are rarely used, as getting to them without a vehicle isn't an enjoyable experience, so most will just throw themselves at the two tight doors. You can capture the objective from the outside, but if enemies are holding the bunker, then you're going to have to clear them out before you leave anyway, otherwise they'll just take the point back. Thankfully, DICE made the smart decision to not have the spawn point be inside of the bunker, so anyone you kill inside of the bunker has to fight through you to get back in. That is, unless they have a squad mates or a spawn beacon placed there. The fuel compound at E is a pretty good objective, lots of cover and variety, with the capture points being both accessible by infantry and vehicles. I don't like how high the capture radius is at the tower of E2. It means that infantry could camp at the top in order to hold it from attackers. Compound this with the fact there are limited ways to climb up it, and it can be very frustrating. Frequently people just camp the ladder there. This sector is also really out of the way compared to the other objectives. If I'm fighting up here, I'm usually trying to hang around here because moving to the north end of the map is a pain without a vehicle. I think you're absolutely mad if you travel through the tunnel through the hill without a vehicle, since there's practically no cover, and if you're caught by an enemy vehicle, you're absolutely toast. So your only option is to go towards the hill at D, which has very low visibility and has frequent infantry flowing down from D, who will have the high ground advantage over you. And then, you have to fight over D, so that sucks. I'm going to give this map a C. There are glimpses of fun to be had, but it's always marred by something bad. Orbital 64 cuts out the south of the map and puts all of the focus on the north. This layout contains 3 double flag sectors, with only 2 new flags, A2 and C1. The pre-built rocket in the hangar at A2 is a pointless objective. A1 spawns right above it, so anyone who controls that will naturally be able to easily control A2. The objective itself is messy. The capture radius contains 2 disconnected levels. By that I mean you can't walk from the lower level to the higher level and still remain within the capture radius. This makes it very frustrating if you're trying to defend it from someone who is on the upper platform, and you have to first check the lower area first. There should have really been some zip lines here to avoid this. The B objectives are still good, but still dominated by A1. C1 is the new flag at the C sector, and it's a pretty solid objective with some decent cover and the ability to be assaulted by vehicles. The spawns are frequently in the empty field to the north, which means you're easy pickings for people capturing the objective. Overall, the smaller map is better, but I feel like the map has to have a natural advantage to the Russian team because they're almost guaranteed to capture and hold the A objective first. I'm going to give this one a B. Reclaimed is a great map, and I'm very happy that DICE added it. The single objectives on the outer edges are all very fun. A, B and E are all great objectives to fight over as infantry or in vehicles. Objective D is alright despite being a bunker. What distinguishes this from D on Orbital 128 is that their entrances from the east, south and west, which are all easily accessible, so defenders camping inside aren't able to easily create choke points as on Orbital. Still, it's probably my least favourite objective on this map. The two warehouses at sea are mainly infantry focused objectives, but they can be attacked by vehicles who are brave or foolish enough. Both roofs are easily accessible, which adds some interesting verticality for everyone. C2 has an anti-air turret on top, and this is a valuable tool for dealing with enemy helicopters on this map, and if it's used at the right time it can tear them out of the sky. However, if you aren't able to one-pass them, or you shoot too soon, you'll likely be the first thing they hunt, and the turret is quite easy to kill. This was a very welcome addition to this map as it gives every class an anti-air option. I would have liked to see more of these in other maps. These are fun objectives to fight over. I will say that moving from one warehouse to another is very risky since it's very open. I'd recommend using smokes here if possible. The areas between the sectors are full of cover and have some interesting places to fight over. The hills between A and C1 and the train line between B and C2 are some of my favourite places. It also feels like you're never running for too long before seeing some action. I really enjoy this map, and despite some minor issues, whenever it comes up I'm always happy, and for that reason I'm going to give this an S. It could have been an A if D was a more annoying objective, but personally I've not had too many issues with it. To win, I recommend focusing on the outer objectives since they're quite easy to capture compared to Sector C. Grab a vehicle and get rolling capping. Okay. Before we start this, let me explain. I have never loved those infantry-focused meat grinder maps. I understand the love for them, but for me they're just not why I play Battlefield. Locker and Operation Metro? No thanks. Redacted is a great map if you love Locker and Metro. If jamming yourself on the other side of a doorway from the enemy and spraying bullets into smoke, hunting for hit markers is your jam, then you probably think that this is the best map in 2042. And I can't blame you. As far as these maps go, I do like a few things about it. For one, these three main lanes offered are generally filled with decent cover and do provide a few flanking opportunities between the lanes to the team that is able to break through the chokehold of their path. There's also a secret zipline lane which runs the entire south of the map, which can be used by sneaky squads in order to backcap and help break stalemates, which is very welcome. I do think plenty of people don't know about these. Here are the entrances in case you don't know. The downside of this lane is that it can be completely shut down by a gremlin who wants to just camp at the end of a zipline segment with a bipoded LMG. The sectors are all good and varied, lots of cover and interesting fighting opportunities, however most of your fighting will be done between these objectives. One absolutely stupid decision by DICE can be found at the north end of B. The path between B and C here can be very easily camped with barely any risk thanks to this rocky hill that looks down the stairway. You shouldn't be able to shut down an entire route this easily. Otherwise there isn't much else to say. It's great if you like this kind of map, but I unfortunately don't. I'll play it, but not before letting out a slight sigh when I see that it's coming up on the loaded screen. For this map I want to give it a C based on my enjoyment of the map, but I know that it is better than this. If this is one of your favourite maps, then I completely understand that we just enjoy different aspects of this game. If you want to win, I would suggest doing two things. One, don't just hold choke points, push them. Even if it means you're just throwing yourself in and you're only able to get 1 or 2 kills, at least you attempted to make progress. Too many players just camp and before they know it they're being overrun by an enemy who had the balls to push. 2, play recon and use the spawn beacon. If you can get a sneaky beacon location, and even 1 or 2 members of your squad using it to backcap, you can be a thorn in the side of the enemy that will slowly bleed them dry, either by diverting resources from their front line or draining tickets by successful caps. What the hell is going on with the flag count on Renewal 128? How is this balanced? The two gimme sectors, A and E, aren't even balanced, since invaders getting into the building at E are way harder to flush out compared to the same happening at A. I've spent entire games trying to recover E, going backwards and forwards between those two flags for no real gain. On the other hand, I think I fought over A maybe like 10 times total. E is pretty much completely infantry only, but a lot of Sector A can be influenced by all vehicles. Don't get me wrong, they're fun objectives to fight over, but E can be very frustrating. Moving away from these, B is a single flag objective. Compare that to D, which is dual flag, so naturally B is much more relevant to the game. D1 can have some frustrating spawn points, putting players out in the open field to the south, and since the massive capture radius extends to the roof of D1, the players spawning in the south have a massive disadvantage here. The checkpoint at sea is a reasonably good time, and it's typically where I go if I want to have the biggest effect on the game if I'm on the Russian team. It's a single flag that can be capped and held pretty well by either infantry or vehicles. The spawn points that lie in the north of the desert side of the wall require you to make a pretty sizable sprint without any cover to get back to the capture point, and it's very easy for infantry using the upper level of the objective to exploit this. If I'm playing on the US team, then I'm absolutely getting myself and my squad embedded at E. The disruption caused here by constantly contesting their give me sector is just too valuable, plus the infantry fighting here is nice and quite varied. The balance is bad, but my biggest gripe with this map is this stupid wall in the centre. Not only does it limit travel between the two parts of the map, but it seems to cause vehicles to just camp on their side of the map, which is super frustrating. The hills in the desert around B and the fields below E always have at least one vehicle camping, frequently more than one. Plus, if you're unlucky enough to get a tornado on this map, then the doors close, completely blocking off access for vehicles. Why did DICE think this was a good idea? Oh look, the shit storm is coming that interrupts everyone's game. How about to make sure people really just stop playing, we shut the doors so they have to look at what we've made. This could have been remedied if they'd given us some destruction in this map and let us blow holes in the wall. Either pre-selected holes, maybe set up with C4 that infantry players could activate, or caused by just constant explosive damage. A massive missed opportunity here in my opinion. Given everything, I've got to give this map a D. Honestly, I don't know what they were thinking here. They did it again? What's with this imbalance? Capture the checkpoint at B and hold it, and you give yourself a massive advantage. The poor Russian team is still stuck fighting over the facility at D. Usually the 64 version plays better than the 128 one, but here I think they played just as poorly as each other. There isn't really much else to talk about, it's another D. Please let me know if you like Renewal, and let me know what I'm not seeing. Fuck that wall. When Spearhead was released, it renewed my interest in the game and let me know that DICE still had the ability to make a good map. The map itself is very beautiful and a very good layout in my opinion. Because of its shape, you'll see frequent front lines developing naturally, usually between B and C or C and D. There are plenty of paths, hills and general cover throughout, so travelling on this map is always a good time. The map design also lends itself nicely to some good infantry versus vehicle gameplay. Due to them being single flags, B and D sectors are the most important. Sometimes I'll actually skip past capturing C2 just to get to these, since the C sector especially is very back and forth throughout most games. My one issue with this map is these stupid cubes. Players flying up to them and camping on the top can mean that the objectives below can almost never be completely captured. This isn't too much of a problem at C2, since there's generally a good density of players around that sector, but at E1 it's a huge problem. If you're playing as the Russian team and you want to do the most damage to the enemy, go as a recon, get yourself on top of E1, hide a spawn beacon up there, and get your squad to constantly assault E1 or E2. This completely disrupts the game for the US team, and it's one of the most frustrating situations to be in. You pretty much need your friendly aircraft to clear the roof, otherwise you're going to be losing E the entire game. Compare this to A, which is almost never assaulted. I'll say it again, this decision was another style over substance. These buildings could have been much smaller and had access to the roofs, either with zip lines or internal stairways. At least now we have access to the pond hawks to get us up there, but at the same time I shouldn't need a vehicle in order to protect an objective. I have fought over E too many times to count, since this issue crops up in almost every game, and barely anyone is willing to help remedy it, because of how fruitless of an endeavour it is. That being said, I do really enjoy this map. The fighting is good, the aesthetic is great, and overall it's a good map. I have to give it an A. It was so close to being an S, but E is a major problem.
You ain't failing on me.
Let me get this out of the way. DICE shouldn't have announced Stadium as a second map as part of Season 7. That was bad marketing. They should have released it after the other map with a, "We want to thank you guys for enjoying our game. Lots of people have said that they wanted this back, so here it is." Stadium, at least the inside objectives, make up my preferred kind of infantry map. Redacted players, put down your pitchforks, let me explain. You see in Redacted there are only so many paths that always end up being choke points, and the fighting generally becomes a stalemate. Flanking isn't really possible unless you break through one of these choke points, or you use the one tunnel path to the south if it isn't also blocked by the enemy. Stadium, however, has so many different small flanking opportunities open at every point that make it impossible for the enemy to hold them all. The seating area, the multiple floors, the multiple zip lines and the stairways all give you loads of options, so I play this map constantly looking for these gaps in the enemy's armour, peeking through them just long enough to get some damage done, then moving on to the next one. I think if you're the kind of player trying to force the chokehold nature of Redacted into the main corridor of Stadium, then you will naturally be very frustrated with this map. So yeah, the interiors are a blast for me. The outside objectives are kind of meh. I think B could happily exist and it wouldn't be too much of an issue, being an objective that gives players who want a more medium ranged combat opportunities a place to play, and also opening up a route for your team to have some better access to more flanking routes into the stadium, but A perplexes me. It's just so out of the way from where all of the fighting is that it often just gets forgotten by most players, and honestly I can't blame them. A is a boring open objective that just doesn't fit with the rest of the map. Maybe it was to help with breakouts from full caps, but from what I've seen when playing this it doesn't really help that much. Also a little tip, if you want to get to the interior objectives first at the start of the game, don't hit spawn until the pre-game timer runs out. If you wait, you'll be able to actually spawn inside of the stadium. If you don't wait, then you'll be forced into a condor or a hind during the opening, causing you to start outside. Nice work DICE, that was a choice. I think this map demonstrates how they could have successfully gotten 2 maps out of one of the larger maps when they were reworking them. Hell, they could have probably gotten 3 out of Hourglass. I think doing this more with other maps would have given the community a lot more content than what we currently have, and since the assets were mostly already there, it wouldn't be that much more work to complete. You want to win here? Focus on the 3 objectives in the stadium, use flanking a lot, and don't just run down the main hallway into the sights of everyone camping it. Learn the alternative routes which you have access to and get to exploiting them. I'm happy to give this a low A. I enjoy my time on this map. Yes, it doesn't have vehicles for that aspect of Battlefield which I love, but it does give me something which I rarely get out of a Battlefield map, an infantry map which I'm always excited to play. Stranded is another great map in my opinion. The outer objectives are all a good time to fight over, whether as infantry or a vehicle, and I don't feel like either one of them has a layout which leads to an advantage over another. Each of them is memorable to me, with them all being unique layouts and no major issues. Travelling between the objectives is great too, with a decent amount of options. Going between the north and the south objectives, you can go around the ship, onto the ship with multiple zip lines offered, or through the ship, perhaps heading to a flag at sea on the way. Going between the west and east objectives is a bit more time consuming, but there is a decent amount of cover offered, and you can always head towards the ship in order to take a less direct route. Of note are the towers and transformers between B and E, which offer some good fighting opportunities with plenty of cover and height on offer. You can also take a risk ziplining up, in order to help you parachute towards your destination. The hill between A and D is also a frequent spot for vehicle fights, being a very powerful spot to hold to prevent enemy vehicles pushing towards your objectives. The interior of the ship at sea is probably my least favourite sector, but it does offer some good infantry fighting, with C2 being completely inaccessible to vehicles. It being a dual flag means that it's much harder to capture. Honestly, I usually just ignore it and focus on the outer objectives, since I get more out of them. Something which I would recommend to you if you want to have the largest impact on the ticket count in this map. In fact, now that I think about it, I rarely head up to the top of the ship at all, other than to use the small path provided by the zip lines that head north and south between A and B and D and E, but the few times which I've been up there, the fighting has always been pretty decent. I've definitely taken quite a few rockets to my tank from there, so it's clearly a great option if you're able to hit your rocket shots and you want a fairly safe place to cut off vehicles. The centre of the boat would have been a great place to put an anti-air turret. It's a shame DICE wasn't adding these to maps when they created it. A fantastic map, which I honestly think is pretty underrated. I would enjoy seeing this map in future games, so I will give it an S. Maybe next time they could split C into 2 sectors to make them a bit more relevant. I don't know. The other map from Bad Company 2, Valparaiso, is an awesome time. The sector A and C are both 2 flag sectors with a jungle area between them. These flags are all fun to fight over, with a nice amount of destructible cover, which it inherited from Bad Company 2. The capture zones are decently sized so both infantry and vehicles can participate in the capturing. The dense jungle and hills between them mean that vehicles have to stick to the road between points 1 and 2, but infantry are able to freely move through these. As such, you can get some pretty interesting fights happening here. Sector B is a massive 3-point sector, which is where most of the fighting typically happens. Due to the hill in the middle, I've found that the capturing usually happens in an anti-clockwise fashion, since you can go from B1 to B3 down the hill, B3 to B2 up the hill, and then from B2 to B1 by jumping off the unscalable cliff. I mean unscalable, unless of course you're persistent and you want to climb like you would in Elder Scrolls. The combat on these B flags is fun, but it rarely ends in the full zone being captured. For this reason, it's much more meaningful to work on the sectors A and C, since they're easier to capture. To win, I would recommend going to the sector closest to your enemy's main base, deploying a spawn beacon somewhere in the jungle between these flags, and constantly harassing these objectives to make sure that the enemy doesn't get to keep these sectors full capped. You can be an absolute nightmare to the enemy like this, and if you have even a few members of your squad doing this, it can quickly lead to a massive advantage in tickets. Other things worthy of note on this map are the mud flats to the south, which is a great location to exploit with your vehicles in order to safely get around to the far objectives where you can be more damaging. Plenty of players end up camping in the lighthouse, but I barely find that they have too much influence on the game, other than providing a constant spawn point for infantry assaulting B1. If you are one of these players, then can I suggest that you guard the B1 flag? You're in a perfect position for it, but I find that most of you spend your entire game shooting and missing at targets way across the map. I have to say, I hate the multi-flag sectors here, but the map is just too fun. I almost never have a bad time. I have to give this one an S. Great work whoever worked on this map and brought it up to code for 2042. Next time, less multi-flag sectors, but still fun. Well, I've been Marzipandan and this has been my TED Talk. If you're still here, then all I can assume is that you're either currently writing the longest, most hateful comment ever explaining why I'm wrong about every single map, or you've fallen asleep. And either way, I'm very grateful you made it. I've put a link to the blank tier list in the description of the video. If you're inclined to complete it and add it to the comments, I'd love to see how you rank the maps. I've been busy being a new dad, but know that I've been loving reading all of your comments. I don't always have time to respond to them, but I do read them all. If you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe for more. It really helps the channel out. I hope I see you on the battlefield. Take care.